Hi, it's Bruce Adolphe with episode 8. When I was 7, I sometimes said the word magician when I meant to say musician. After I straightened that out, it took me years to discover that perhaps they are sometimes the same after all. All the magic tricks I learned from Zalon the Great were sleight-of-hand illusions, and I practiced them so much when I was 8 years old that I can still do them today. Zalon the Great was really Paul Zalon, an activities counselor at Camp Saskatchewan in the Adirondacks, but he could indeed do excellent close-up magic, and I was hooked. I learned how to make coins disappear and reappear, and I practiced these tricks on dogs before moving on to an audience of people. When the pilot of a small private plane asked if we would like to see some of his tricks, he did not mean sleight of hand. This happened one summer when I flew to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, to participate in the OK Mozart Festival with Itzhak Perlman in a private plane. The only passengers were Itzhak, his daughter Nava, the pianist, and me. The pilot was talkative throughout the flight, and as we approached Bartlesville, he said, "How would you all like to have a demonstration of some flight tricks?" The tricks that our pilot was referring to were aerobatic loops, spins, and rolls, and we were not interested. But before we could make our fears known, the show had started. The plane went spinning into the clouds. Suddenly, Itzhak let out a series of huge bellows and glissandos with vibrato, and at first I couldn't tell whether he was singing or screaming, but it was hard to listen because my stomach had grazed my brainstem. I turned to look at Nava for corroboration that her father was merely singing the bass line of a Gesualdo madrigal from Book 6, but she was in the midst of a silent enactment of Munch's The Scream, worthy of Marcel Marceau. After a perfectly executed barrel roll, our pilot maneuvered the plane into a stunning scissors zigzag before announcing, "Okay, that's it for now. Sorry to stop the show, but we'll be landing soon." As we landed in Bartlesville's single runway airport, Itzhak's voice came under his control, and he sang a few bars of the aria Vesti la Juba at full volume. As we staggered up from our seats and made our way out of the plane, the pilot shook our hands firmly. When Itzhak started to leave, the pilot said, "May I have your autograph, Mr. Pavarotti?" Itzhak had reached for his pen, but then thought better of it. We checked into the Hotel Phillips. In Bartlesville, the name Phillips reigns. Hotel Phillips, Phillips Petroleum Company Museum, Phillips 66 Gymnastic Club, Jane Phillips Medical Center, Frank Phillips Mansion, Frank Phillips Boulevard, Phillips 66 Phillips Building. Ransom Wilson, the conductor and flutist, who is also the founding artistic director of OK Mozart, had asked me to host a few concerts. So I was thinking about what to say to open the first concert as I left the lobby of Hotel Phillips and strolled over to the Art Center. Then it hit me. I said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just flew into town and I needed a drink, so I went over to the hotel bar and ordered a Phillips screwdriver." That broke the ice. Zalon the Great took me to Tannen's Magic Shop on West 34th Street in Manhattan, with its many shelves, drawers, and glass cases of magic tricks and books on magic. There, I bought a classic deception, 3 small red wooden balls and 1 metal half ball that fit onto the wooden balls so that you could, with lots of practice, make a 4th ball appear and disappear between your fingers. When I visited the pianist David Golub and his wife Maria Mino in Brissago in the 1980s, I brought the trick with me for some reason, and David became obsessed with learning to do it. I got very little sleep for several days because David practiced the trick at night, and the wooden balls kept hitting the floor and rolling around, and then David had to move furniture to find them. One night, there was no such noise. That either meant that he had given up on the trick or had mastered it. I knew David Golub never gave up on anything. So the next morning when I saw him, I said, Okay, show me. The fourth magical little red ball appeared and disappeared elegantly as he waved his hand about. But the best part was his enormous grin that he could not make disappear for weeks. Also staying in the Mino house with us, in Brissago, was Arrigo Pelliccia, a much-beloved violinist who had played the European premiere of Schoenberg's violin concerto at the Venice Contemporary Music Festival in 1948. At the time, I only knew that he was an enchanting conversationalist in his 70s who had recently retired from concertizing and was now having some short-term memory loss. Arrigo enjoyed recounting his concert experiences during dinners, and at the end of every dinner, he did a hilarious imitation of the pianist Alfred Cortot taking bows after a performance. My plans included leaving Brissago to spend 1 week in Milan before coming back. I wanted to give Arrigo something to remember me by, so I gave him a copy of a piece that I had composed for violin and piano. I wrote simply "For Arrigo" on the cover and signed my name. He had not played at all during the time that I had been in Brissago, so I was under the impression that he no longer picked up his violin. I said goodbye and left for Milan. When I returned a week later, I became aware of the sound of a violin, and the music was the piece I had given Arrigo. I quietly walked up the stairs to the landing where Arrigo's room was. He was practicing the piece very seriously, and I saw him writing in fingerings and bowings. I had to say something. I knocked on the open door, and he stopped playing, looked at me with no recognition at all, and said cautiously, Yes, may I help you?" I said, "Arrigo, I'm Bruce Adolphe, don't you remember me? I'm the composer of the piece you're playing," and he interrupted, "Aha! So tell me, is there a concert coming up? Am I supposed to perform this somewhere? I saw it on my music stand, but I could not remember how it got there." I said, "You sound fantastic. You could perform this wonderfully tonight if there were a concert." "But there is not a concert tonight, is there?" he asked. I said, "No, but it means a lot to me that you play this piece like that." He bowed, a little like Cortot, and said, "See you at dinner tonight, then?" "Yes, of course." "Then you will see my imitation of Alfred Cortot," he beamed. Music stays in the brain. Memories of music, musical skills, musicality. Even with dementia and Alzheimer's, music stays. That Arrigo could not remember why the music was on his stand, and yet he could still learn it and play it on the violin is a great lesson in life. Practice, practice, practice. Itzhak once told me, "If you learn at least 9 major concertos by the time you are 9 years old, then you don't have to practice much after that." In 1995, Itzhak asked me to compose a piece about food with a kind of menu of movements that the performer could choose from at a concert. One of the first movements I wrote was called Brandy, which I musically suggested with a lyrical tune laced with double stops and glissandi. I brought it to Itzhak, who stared at the music for a while and then said, "I don't actually drink brandy. Can you change the title to something else like Chocolate Cake?" Yes. I wrote the title Chocolate Cake on the music, and he played it with a gooey legato, and you could hear the sweet icing in his vibrato and the sticky bits by the way he connected the notes. Magic. For magical musicians, the notes on the page are not fingerings, but sounds waiting to be brought to life. The first time I encountered magical playing was when I was 16 and Yo-Yo Ma, who was also 16 then, read through a little piece I wrote, my first piece for cello and piano. I had briefly shown the piece to Nancy Bidlack, who said there was one chord in it using all 4 strings that simply could not be played, but it could be arpeggiated. All I had to do was put that squiggly arpeggio symbol in front of the chord and all would be well. Yo-Yo and I met in a practice room on the 4th floor of Juilliard and we began to read through the piece. When the impossible chord came, I suddenly realized that I had not put in the squiggle in front of the cello notes. but Yo-Yo played it perfectly in tune, all 4 notes as a chord. We got to the end of the piece, and I turned to him and said, "You played a chord that is supposed to be impossible on the cello. I meant to arpeggiate it." Yo-Yo said, "Really? Let's try it again, and you can stop me when we get to that spot." Well, we started again, and when the chord arrived, I said, "There, stop!" Yo-Yo stopped his bow and looked at his left hand. His fingers were frozen in a terribly uncomfortable-looking knot. Shaking out his fingers, he said, "Ooh, yeah, that's true. You really can't play that." But he did. Magic. Another kind of magic happens when a performer plays a brand new piece more like I wanted it to be than I had realized was actually possible. When I wrote the music and text for The Nightingale, for solo violin and narrator, for Daniel Hope, I had composed sweet singing music for The Nightingale and mechanical comical music for the automated, activated, mechanical, electronic, digital, exotic, robotic, simulated bird equipped with artificial musical intelligence. I imagined the sound of the violin playing this music and trusted that my choice of notes and rhythms would capture the qualities required to illustrate the characters in the story. What I could not have foreseen was the extraordinary mix of timbral and temporal imagination that Daniel could employ in the rendering of the music, giving a fleeting, vulnerable beauty to the Nightingale and an electrical charge and energy surge to the robotic bird that made what I had written sound more like what I wanted than I knew could actually happen. That's another kind of magic. Perhaps it is how a playwright feels hearing lines spoken by Tom Hiddleston or Saoirse Ronan, only at the moment of performance fully appreciating the potential of one's own writing, formerly just symbols on a page. This has happened to me more than a few times with the Brentano String Quartet. I would come to a rehearsal of a new piece and hear them play my music more like it should be than I had known it could be. And then they would ask me for criticism. Like a child who was just given exactly what he wanted but never really expected, I could suddenly imagine something more, just in case it were possible. And then they would give me that. And of course, they were not satisfied. Realizing an imagined possibility is already great music making. Making real something beyond what has been imagined. That is magical music making. It has been glorious knowing so many musicians. Ceylon the Great would be pleased. To be continued.